The child had not spoken in 3 years. That was the first thing they told Josie when the royal escort arrived at her village before dawn. 4 soldiers in black leather armor sitting rigid on horseback, their breath rising in pale clouds against the winter dark. She had been awake already. She was always awake before the sun, grinding dried herbs by candlelight, the small flame throwing orange warmth across the stone walls of her cottage. The knock had not startled her. The cold that followed the opening door had. "You are the healer called Josie?" The soldier who spoke had ice in his beard and no warmth in his eyes. He looked at her the way people always looked at her, scanning for something impressive, and finding only a young woman in a worn linen dress and a gray wool cloak too thin for the season, her golden braid draped over one shoulder, her hands stained faintly green from the evening's work. "I am," she said. "You will come with us." It was not a question. It never was, when men in royal black came to your door. She had asked only one thing before climbing onto the horse they brought for her. "Where are we going?" And the soldier had answered with 4 words that turned her blood to ice water. Iron Vale, the king's stronghold. She had heard stories about Iron Vale the way everyone in the Northern Territories had, in pieces, in whispers, in the kind of careful voices people used when speaking of things they feared. The fortress sat at the edge of the ashwood, a place where the pines grew so dense and dark that even on clear days the light barely reached the ground. The wolves of Iron Vale were not like the packs of the lowlands. They were older, larger, governed by a bloodline that stretched back so far into history, it had become something close to legend. And at the head of that bloodline stood Cassian. Josie had never seen the Alpha King. She had seen his crest, a black wolf beneath a fractured moon, stamped into wax seals on every trade agreement that passed through the northern villages. She had heard his name spoken with a particular kind of reverence that sat somewhere between respect and terror. She had heard what happened to the pack that had tried to challenge his border 3 winters ago. She had tried very hard not to think about that on the long ride through the dark. The forest swallowed them before sunrise. The pines closed overhead like a cathedral ceiling, blocking the gray morning sky until the world became shadow and cold earth and the soft sound of hooves on frozen ground. The air smelled of pine resin and wood smoke, and something deeper underneath, something wild and ancient that Josie could not name but felt in the back of her throat like a warning. Iron Vale emerged from the trees, like something the earth had grown rather than built. Its walls were black stone, rough-cut and massive, rising 3 stories above the tree line. Iron torches burned along the ramparts. Guards in fur-lined cloaks stood motionless at their posts, watching the escort approach with eyes that caught the torchlight in a way that was not entirely human. The gates opened without a word. Inside, the courtyard was wide and swept clean despite the frost. Stable hands moved quickly and quietly, taking the horses with practiced efficiency. A woman in a deep burgundy cloak met Josie at the foot of the steps, tall, sharp-featured, with silver-streaked dark hair pinned severely at her neck. She introduced herself as Wren, the king's head attendant, and her expression made it clear she had serious doubts about whatever plan had brought Josie here. "You should know," Wren said, her voice low as she guided Josie up the stone steps and through a heavy oak door banded with iron, "that 3 healers have come before you. All 3 left within the week. 2 asked to leave. 1 was sent away." "What happened to them?" Josie asked. "They could not help the boy. And the king does not respond well to failure." The interior of Iron Vale was warmer than Josie expected. Great hearths burned in every corridor, their heat rolling outward in welcome waves. The stone walls were hung with dark tapestries, maps, the mounted antlers of creatures she did not entirely recognize. Bookshelves lined the passages between rooms, filled with volumes in several languages. Whatever she had imagined a warlord's fortress to look like, it was not this. Not this dense, layered world of leather and old paper, and the persistent smell of pine smoke, and something herbal she could not immediately identify. She was brought to a room on the 2nd floor. Stone walls, a narrow window, a hearth already burning, a bed with wool blankets and a pitcher of water on a wooden stand. Basic, but clean. More than she had in her own cottage. "You will rest," Wren said. "The king will see you at midday." "And the child?" Josie asked. "Can I see him first?" Wren paused with her hand on the door frame. She turned to look at Josie with an expression that was difficult to read, somewhere between surprise and something that might have been the very earliest edge of hope. "The boy is 7 years old," she said quietly. "His name is Emmerich. He has not walked without pain since the accident 2 years ago, and he has not spoken a single word in 3 years. Not one word. Not even to his father." She let that settle. The king loves that child more than he loves anything in this world, and it is destroying him to watch his son disappear into silence. Josie absorbed this carefully. "What kind of accident?" "That," Wren said, "is something you will need to ask the king." She left. The door did not lock behind her, which Josie noted with quiet relief. She did not rest. She sat on the edge of the bed and opened the worn leather satchel she had been allowed to bring, the one that held her dried herbs in small cloth pouches, her mortar and pestle, the beeswax tin of salve she made from calendula and pine resin, her journal of remedies written in her own cramped hand. She spread them on the blanket and looked at them. Humble things, simple things, tools that had helped with fevers and wounds and grief-born sleeplessness in a village of 200 people. Could they help a king's son who had forgotten how to speak? She was still turning that question over when the knock came at her door. Too light to be a guard, too hesitant to be Wren. She opened it. In the corridor stood a small boy in a heavy wool tunic, dark-haired, pale, with eyes the color of deep winter sky. He stood with one shoulder pressed to the wall, his left leg braced in a fitted wooden support strapped with leather at the knee and ankle. He was looking at her satchel, still spread on the bed behind her, with an expression of careful, cautious curiosity. He did not speak, but he did not leave either. Josie crouched down slowly, bringing herself to his height. She did not reach for him. She did not smile too wide or speak too loud. She simply looked at him the way she looked at wounded things, with patience and without pity. "You must be Emmerich," she said softly. He said nothing, but his eyes moved from the satchel to her face. "I have something in that bag," she said, "that smells like warm bread even though it isn't. Would you like to smell it?" A long pause. The corridor was very quiet. Then, slowly, Emmerich stepped through the doorway, and somewhere in the depths of Iron Vale, a door opened, heavy and deliberate, and footsteps that did not sound like anyone else's moved through the stone passage below. The Alpha King was coming. Josie heard him before she saw him. The footsteps were unhurried but weighted, the kind that belonged to someone who had never needed to announce himself because every room already knew he was coming. They climbed the stone staircase at the end of the corridor with a steadiness that felt almost deliberate, as if the man attached to them had decided long ago that rushing was beneath him. Emmerich heard them too. The boy went still beside Josie, his small fingers loosening around the cloth pouch she had placed in his hands, the one that smelled of dried chamomile and toasted oats, warm and gentle as a kitchen on a winter morning. His eyes moved to the corridor entrance, and something in his expression shifted. Not fear. Something more complicated than fear. The particular stillness of a child who has learned to read a parent's moods from a great distance. Cassian filled the doorway the way storm clouds fill a sky, completely, and with the immediate sense that the space had been waiting for exactly that. He was tall, broad through the shoulders, dressed in a black leather vest crossed with 2 dark straps buckled at the chest, a fur mantle across his shoulders the color of a moonless night. His dark hair was pulled back in long braids, a few loose strands fallen across his forehead. His eyes were a pale, startling blue, the kind of blue found in deep ice, in the coldest part of a winter river, and they moved first to his son. Whatever lived behind those eyes when he looked at the boy was not the cold thing the stories promised. It was something rawer than that, and Josie recognized it immediately because she had seen it before, in the faces of parents sitting beside sick children by candlelight. It was the particular anguish of loving something you cannot fix. Then his gaze moved to her. She stood, straightened her cloak, held his stare because she had learned the hard way, in a village where being overlooked was its own kind of danger, that looking away first cost you something you did not always get back. "You are the healer," he said. His voice was low and even, the words carrying the faint accent of the deep north, where the consonants were harder, and the silences between sentences meant more than they did elsewhere. "Josie," she said. "Yes." His eyes dropped briefly to Emmerich, then back to her. "He came to you on his own." It was not a question, but she answered it anyway. "He did. I didn't call him in. I left the door open." Something shifted almost imperceptibly in Cassian's expression. He looked at his son again, at the cloth pouch still held loosely in the boy's hands, at the way Emmerich had not retreated to the wall when his father appeared. "Come," he said to the boy, not unkindly. A different quality in his voice now, still low, but softer at the edges, worn smooth by repetition, by the specific tenderness of a parent speaking to a child who could not answer. Emmerich moved toward him without resistance, tucking himself against his father's side with the ease of long habit. Cassian's hand settled briefly on the boy's dark head. Then he looked at Josie. "Walk with me." They left Emmerich in the care of a quiet young woman named Petra, who appeared from a side room with the efficiency of someone who had been waiting nearby, and Cassian led Josie down a back corridor and through a heavy door into the eastern wing of Ironvale. This part of the fortress was less traveled. The tapestries here were older, their colors faded, their scenes depicting battles and forests and figures she did not recognize. The air smelled of cold stone and old candle wax. He brought her to a room she understood immediately was his study. A large oak desk dominated the center, buried under maps and rolled parchments weighted at the corners with river stones and iron ink pots. Bookshelves lined every wall, the volumes arranged with the kind of deliberate order that belonged to someone who spent real time in this room. A fire burned in the hearth. 2 chairs faced each other near the window, which looked out across the tree line of the ashwood, the pines dark and endless beneath a sky the color of pewter. Cassian did not sit. He stood near the window, arms crossed, and watched her take in the room with the evaluating stillness of a man who had spent years judging people quickly and rarely being wrong. "The last healer," he said, told me Emmerich's silence was permanent, that whatever had broken in him was beyond the reach of herbs and remedies. His jaw tightened briefly. "The one before that said the leg would never support his weight without the brace, that he would carry pain for the rest of his life." "And the third?" Josie asked. A pause. "The third said nothing useful and left before I could ask her a second question." Josie moved to one of the chairs by the window and sat, folding her hands in her lap. She was aware of how she must look in this room. Small, plainly dressed, her cloak mended at one hem, her boots still carrying the mud of the forest road. She was aware that she did not look like someone capable of doing what 3 others had failed to do. She said it plainly anyway. "Tell me about the accident." The silence that followed was long enough that she thought he might refuse. He moved away from the window, pulled the second chair slightly to face hers, and sat. He did not lean back. He sat forward, elbows on his knees, hands clasped, staring at the floor between them. 2 years ago, he said, there was an attack on the border. A rival faction. Wolves from the southern reaches who had decided my leadership was a point of negotiation. His voice was flat, controlled. I was away from the stronghold. Emmerich was with his guardian in the outer courtyard. The attack breached the western gate. He stopped. Josie waited. Emmerich saw things a child should not see, he said finally, and in trying to run, he fell from the courtyard wall. The drop was significant. The leg was badly injured. By the time our physician reached him, he stopped again. His hands tightened against each other. He was already not speaking. The physician said the shock of what he had witnessed closed something in him, that the silence was his mind's way of protecting itself. "And the leg?" Josie asked gently. "The bone healed, but the nerves were damaged. He walks with pain. Some mornings he cannot put weight on it at all. The blue eyes came up to hers. He is 7 years old. He should be running through this forest. Instead, he stopped himself, set his jaw, looked back at the fire. Josie was quiet for a moment, turning everything over with care. "I want to be honest with you," she said, "because I think you would prefer that to false promises." He looked at her with an expression that might have been the barest beginning of respect. "Go on." "I cannot guarantee outcomes. I can observe and listen and try things that the other healers may not have tried, because I approach these things differently. I don't believe the body and the mind heal separately. I believe what happens to one happens to the other." She paused. "Emmeric's silence and his pain may be more connected than anyone has told you." Cassian studied her for a long moment. "Every person who has walked through that door has told me what they cannot do," he said slowly. "You are the first to tell me what you believe instead." "Is that enough to let me try?" she asked. He was quiet. Outside, the wind moved through the ashwood, a low sound against the stone walls, like the forest breathing. "Ren will give you access to whatever you need," he said at last. "Herbs, supplies, the physician's records. You will have full access to Emmerich during the day. At meals, you will eat with the household." He stood, signaling the conversation's end. "But understand this, healer. That boy is everything that remains of something I was not able to protect. If you give him false hope—" "I won't," Josie said, rising. She met his gaze steadily. "I don't deal in false hope, only in honest effort." Something moved across his face, too fast to catch completely, gone before she could name it. He gave a single nod and turned toward the door. "One more thing," Josie said. He paused without turning. "Who is responsible for the southern faction that attacked your border?" The quality of his stillness changed entirely. "That," he said, his voice dropping to something very quiet and very controlled, "is a question I am still answering." He left. The fire crackled in his absence. Josie stood at the window and looked out at the dark, endless pines, and felt, with a certainty she could not entirely explain, that the answer to that question was going to matter before this was over. The first morning, Josie did nothing. This confused everyone. Ren found her in the corridor outside Emmerich's room before breakfast, sitting cross-legged on the cold stone floor with her back against the wall and her journal open across her knees, writing in her cramped, careful hand. The head attendant stopped and stared with the expression of someone who had expected to find a healer at work and had found a woman sitting on the floor instead. "You are not with the boy," Ren said. "Not yet," Josie answered without looking up. "I'm listening to the house." "The house," Ren repeated, as if testing whether the words made more sense the second time. "Every place has a rhythm," Josie said. "Who moves where, when. What sounds the boy responds to. What makes him pull inward. You learn more in one morning of watching than in a week of doing." She finally looked up. "When does he wake?" Ren's expression remained skeptical, but she answered, "Before dawn, usually. He doesn't sleep well." "Does he come out of his room on his own?" "Sometimes. He walks the east corridor. Always the same path. Does anyone walk with him?" A pause. "We tried. In the beginning. He stopped going when someone followed him." Josie nodded and wrote something down. "And his father?" "When does the king take his morning meal?" "He rarely takes a morning meal," Ren said. "He is usually in the war room by first light." "Does Emmerich know that?" Ren blinked. I'm not certain what you mean." "Does the boy know where his father is in the mornings? Or does he wake up and not know?" The silence that followed was longer than it should have been for a simple question. Ren looked at the closed door of Emmerich's room, then back at Josie, and something in her sharp face shifted. The particular discomfort of someone realizing they have overlooked something obvious for a very long time. "I don't know," she said quietly. "That's useful," Josie said. Thank you. She spent the morning learning the stronghold the way she learned new herbs. Slowly, by touch and observation, resisting the urge to name things before she understood them. She walked the east corridor 3 times, noting the quality of the light through the narrow windows, the warmth near the hearths, the places where drafts came through gaps in the stone. She visited the physician's storage room, where Wren had arranged full access as promised, and spent an hour reading through the carefully kept records of Emmerich's treatment. The splint, the poultices, the tinctures for pain, all dutifully applied, all producing modest and temporary relief. The physician's name was Aldrich. She found him in the storage room on her second visit. A thin older man in a brown wool coat who looked at her with the calm wariness of someone who had been doing his job competently for 30 years and was not particularly interested in being shown how to do it differently. "You've read my notes," he said. It was an observation, not a welcome. "Thoroughly," she agreed. "Your documentation is excellent." He softened fractionally at that. The leg responds to warmth and elevation. The pain is worst in cold weather and after long periods of stillness. He crossed his arms. "I have tried every compound I know for nerve damage. The improvement has been minimal." "What about his sleep?" Josie asked. Aldrich frowned. "He sleeps poorly. I've noted it." "Have you treated it?" "I gave him a mild valerian preparation. He refused it after the second night." "Did anyone ask him why?" The physician's frown deepened. "He doesn't speak." "He doesn't speak in words," Josie said carefully. "That's different from not communicating." Aldrich looked at her for a long moment with an expression that moved through irritation and came out somewhere closer to reluctant curiosity. "What are you suggesting?" "I'm suggesting," she said, "that Emmerich has been telling people things for 2 years that no one has known how to hear." She closed the record she was holding and set it back in its place with care. "I'd like to work alongside you, not instead of you. Your knowledge of his physical condition is irreplaceable. I just want to add something to it." Another long look. Then, unexpectedly, Aldrich pulled a stool from beneath his work table and sat down, gesturing to the one across from him. "Tell me what you're thinking," he said. By midday, Josie had a plan. It was not dramatic. It did not involve rare compounds or complicated procedures. It was, in fact, so simple that she expected resistance when she explained it to Wren over a bowl of thick barley soup in the kitchen. A large, warm room that smelled of wood smoke and roasting root vegetables and the sharp green scent of fresh herbs hanging in bundles from the ceiling beams. "I want Emmerich to know where his father is every morning before he gets out of bed," she said. "Not a visit, just a note. Or an object. Something that tells the boy his father is in the war room, or the east courtyard, or wherever he is. So that when Emmerich wakes up in the dark, he is not waking up to uncertainty." Wren was quiet, her soup forgotten. "I want a small hearth lit in the east corridor before dawn," Josie continued. "So that when he walks toward warmth instead of cold. And I want to begin sitting with him in the afternoons, not to treat him, not to ask anything of him, just to be in the same room, doing my own work, available if he chooses to come close." "That is your treatment?" Wren asked. Her voice was carefully neutral, but Josie heard the doubt underneath. "It is the beginning of it," Josie said. "Trust cannot be rushed, and I genuinely believe, that Emmerich's silence is rooted in a feeling of profound unsafety. His world became dangerous without warning. The people around him could not protect him, so he pulled inward, where nothing could reach him." She paused. "Before I can ask his body to heal, I need his mind to believe that it is safe to try." Wren looked at her for a long time. Outside the kitchen window, snow had begun to fall, soft and steady, blurring the tree line of the ashwood into pale gray shapes. "The king will want to know your plan," Wren said finally. "I know," Josie said. "Will you tell him, or should I?" "You should," Wren said. And then quietly, almost reluctantly, "He listens better to people who look him in the eye when they speak." She found Cassian in the war room, as the afternoon light faded to the color of ash. The room was large and cold despite the fire, dominated by a long table covered in maps weighed down with iron markers. Black for his forces, red for something she did not ask about yet. He was standing at the far end with two of his senior wolves, large men in dark leather who stopped speaking when she entered and watched her with the flat assessment of people deciding whether she was worth their attention. She addressed Cassian directly. "I'd like 5 minutes." He looked at her, then at his men, and made a small gesture. They left without a word, which told her something about the quality of his authority. "Your plan," he said, before she could begin. "Ren told me you had one." "Ren was supposed to let me tell you myself," Josie said. Something crossed his face that was not quite a smile, but lived in the same neighborhood. "She told me that too. I asked anyway." He moved to the near side of the table, leaning back against it, arms crossed. "Go ahead." She told him. All of it, plainly, without softening it into something more impressive than it was. The morning notes, the hearth in the corridor, the quiet afternoons, the philosophy underneath all of it, that Emmerich's healing needed to begin with safety before it could reach anything else. When she finished, Cassian was quiet for a moment that stretched long enough to be uncomfortable. "You want me to leave a note for my son every morning?" he said. "Or an object," Josie said. "Something he can hold. Something that tells him, without words, that you are here, and you know he is awake." The silence this time was different in quality. Heavier. She watched something move through the Alpha King's expression, through the controlled, weathered surface of it, and reach something underneath that was considerably less controlled. "I have sat outside his door at night," Cassian said very quietly. "When he has nightmares. I sit in the corridor until he quiets, because if I go in, he startles." He paused. "He doesn't know I'm there." "He might," Josie said gently. "Children often know more than we think they do." Cassian looked at the map spread on the table between them, at the red iron markers clustered at the southern border. His jaw was set, his eyes distant, and Josie had the sudden clear sense that the southern faction, whoever they were, was not a finished problem. That the danger that had taken his son's voice was still out there, wearing a different shape. "Do what you think is right," he said at last. "I'll leave something for him tomorrow morning." "What will you leave?" she asked. He was quiet for a moment. Then, "He used to carry a small carved wolf, pine wood. I made it for him when he was small." He stopped. "He stopped carrying it after the attack. It's been on the shelf in his room for 2 years." Josie kept her voice very steady. "Leave it outside his door. Just set it there. Don't knock. Don't wait." Cassian nodded once. He turned back to his maps, and Josie understood she was dismissed. She was almost to the door when his voice reached her. "Healer." She turned. He was still looking at the map, not at her. But his voice, when he spoke, had lost its careful evenness. "Do you think it will work?" he asked. Josie considered lying. Considered the comfortable, professional middle ground of cautious optimism that asked nothing of either of them. Instead, she said, "I think your son came into my room yesterday and stood beside me for 20 minutes without being asked. I think that means something is already working." She left before she could see his expression change, but she heard it. The small, involuntary exhale of a man who had been holding his breath for a very long time. The carved wolf was gone from the shelf. Josie noticed it on her 3rd morning at Iron Vale, when she passed Emmerich's open door and caught a glimpse of the empty space where Ren had told her it sat. A small rectangular gap in the dust between 2 heavier books. The kind of absence that only becomes visible once you know what belonged there. She did not mention it. She simply noted it the way she noted everything, quietly and with care, and continued down the east corridor to where she had set up her afternoon space. She had claimed a small alcove off the corridor, a wide stone ledge beneath a tall window that let in the gray northern light, with a wooden stool and a low table where she spread her work. Every afternoon she sat there and did exactly what she had told Wren she would do. Her own work. Sorting herbs, grinding compounds, writing in her journal, being present without requiring anything in return. On the first afternoon, Emmerich had not come. On the second, she had heard his uneven step in the corridor, the soft drag of the brace against the stone, and then silence, as if he had stopped just around the corner and stood listening. On the third afternoon, he appeared at the entrance to the alcove and sat down on the floor 3 feet from her stool, folding his legs carefully beneath him, and watched her work. She did not look up immediately. She finished grinding the dried pine bark she was working with, the scraping sound of the mortar filling the quiet between them. And then she set it aside and reached into her satchel for a length of dried lavender and a small piece of linen. "I'm making a sleep bundle," she said conversationally, as if continuing a discussion they had already been having. "You put it under your pillow, and it helps your mind settle at night. Want to help me tie it?" She set the lavender and linen on the ledge between them, within his reach, and went back to her journal. A long pause, then the soft sound of small hands on dried stems. She did not look. She wrote 3 lines about the pine bark preparation, her handwriting steady, her breathing deliberately slow. When she finally glanced sideways, Emmerich had tied the bundle, imperfectly, the linen bunched unevenly at one end, and was holding it up to examine it in the gray window light. His expression was focused and serious in the way children's faces become when they are doing something that matters to them. He set it down on the ledge and looked at her. She picked it up, examined it with genuine attention, and nodded. "That's well made," she said. "Better than some I've made myself." He did not smile, but something around his eyes changed. An easing, small and careful, like the first thaw at the edge of a long winter. What Josie had not anticipated was Wren. She had categorized the head attendant from the beginning as skeptical but professional, someone who would maintain civil distance while waiting for Josie to fail. What she had not expected was for Wren to appear at her alcove on the 4th morning, with a cup of hot tea and the expression of carefully suppressed something. "He ate breakfast," Wren said, setting the tea down without being asked. "All of it. He usually leaves half." "What did he have?" Josie asked. "Porridge with dried apple. It's what he always has." "Did anything change about how it was served?" Wren paused. "I put a small sprig of dried lavender beside the bowl, as you suggested." "And the hearth in the east corridor?" "Lit before dawn, as you asked." Wren's hands folded in front of her, a habitual gesture. "He walked this morning." Petra watched from a distance. He walked further than usual and came back on his own. Josie wrapped both hands around the tea. The cup was good ceramic, warm and solid. "He's beginning to trust the space," she said. "The predictability is helping. His body knows what to expect, and when the body stops bracing for shock, it starts to release tension it's been carrying." Wren looked at her steadily. "Is that what's keeping him in pain? Tension?" "Partly," Josie said. "The nerve damage is real. But the body under sustained fear holds itself in ways that compound pain significantly. Muscles grip. Circulation slows. The signals that should travel normally through damaged nerves get crowded out by the body's constant state of alert." She paused. "Emmerich has been afraid for 2 years, not of anything he can point to. Just afraid, the way you are afraid when you have seen that safety can end without warning." Wren was quiet for a moment. Then, with the careful deliberateness of someone revealing something they had kept close, "His mother died when he was 3. Cassian raised him alone." She looked out the narrow window. "I have been in this household for 11 years. I have never seen the king afraid of anything. But when Emmerich stopped speaking," she stopped, started again. "He didn't sleep for 4 days. He sat with the boy and read to him from those maps and histories, page after page, just so Emmerich would hear his voice. Nothing else. Just his voice." Josie looked at the tea in her hands. Something had shifted in her chest. something that had no business shifting, she told herself firmly. She was here to do a job. That was all. He should keep doing that, she said. The reading. Whatever he reads, it doesn't matter. The consistency of his father's voice is one of the safest sounds Emmerich knows. It was Aldrich who found the complication. She was in the physician's storage room on the 5th morning, working on a compound of willow bark and warming ginger for Emmerich's leg, when the old physician came in with a record book and a line between his brows that had not been there the day before. "I've been reviewing his history more carefully," Aldrich said, setting the book on the table and opening it to a page covered in close, neat handwriting. "There is something I noted at the time of the accident that I did not pursue far enough." Josie set down her mortar. "What is it?" "When he was brought to me after the fall, his injuries were consistent with the drop, the leg, bruising to his ribs and shoulder." He pointed to a line in his notes. "But there was also bruising along his left forearm, a grip pattern. Fingers." He looked up. "Someone held the boy before he fell, or caught him part way, and held hard enough to bruise." Josie stared at the page. "Was that investigated?" "At the time, the assumption was that someone had tried to catch him," Aldrich said carefully. "But I have been looking at the shape of it again." His finger traced the written description. "The bruising was on the inside of the forearm. If someone caught him in a fall, you would expect the outside. The inside pattern is more consistent with someone holding him over the edge," Josie said quietly. The room became very still. Aldrich closed the record book slowly. "I may be wrong," he said. "I hope I am wrong." Josie's mind was moving fast, retracing everything Cassian had told her. The Southern faction, the border breach, the question she had asked about who was responsible that he had answered with careful, controlled silence. "Who was with Emmerich in the outer courtyard that day?" she asked. "His guardian, you said?" "A man named Dovin," Aldrich said. "He was senior pack. He died in the attack." "Conveniently," Josie said. Aldrich looked at her over his record book, with the expression of a man who had been hoping someone else would say it first. "The king believes the attack was opportunistic," he said. "A border challenge that got out of hand." "And you?" Josie asked. A long pause. "I am a physician," Aldrich said carefully. "I deal in what I can observe and measure." He picked up the record book and held it toward her. "But I think you should be the one to show this to the king." She almost went to Cassian that same evening. She had the record under her arm and a clear path to the war room, and she stood at the junction of 2 corridors for a full minute, weighing it. Then she heard Emmerich's uneven step coming from the direction of his room, and she turned and saw him moving toward the alcove. His alcove now, she thought, the place he had begun to treat as his, with the wooden wolf carved from pine held in his right hand. He was turning it over in his fingers as he walked, the way you turn something over when you are thinking about it from different angles. She put the record book under her arm and followed him. He was already on the floor by the window when she arrived, the wolf set upright on the stone ledge in front of him. He was looking at it with an expression she had not seen on his face before. Not the careful blankness he wore as default, not the focused seriousness of task. Something older and more complicated. A feeling working its way up through 2 years of silence. Josie sat on her stool and waited. The winter light outside had gone the pale amber of late afternoon, the ashwood trees throwing long shadows across the snow. A raven crossed the window frame and disappeared. The fire in the corridor hearth popped once, softly. Then Emmerich picked up the carved wolf, held it toward her, and set it in her hand, not to give it to her. She understood immediately that this was not a gift. It was a showing. He was showing her something that mattered to him, asking her, in the only language he currently trusted, to see it. She held it carefully. It was small, dense. The pine wood worn smooth from years of small hands. The carving was detailed. The grain of the wood used to suggest fur, the legs mid-stride, the head lifted. Someone had made this with real patience, real care. "Your father made this," she said. Emmerich looked at her. His winter blue eyes, so like Cassian's it was startling, were very steady. "He still makes things," she said quietly, not certain this was true, but believing it entirely. "That's not something a person stops knowing how to do." The boy's chin moved slightly, down and up, the smallest possible nod. Josie handed the wolf back. He held it against his chest and looked out the window at the amber-lit snow and the dark trees beyond, and Josie sat beside him in the fading light and did not say anything more, because nothing more was needed. But in the back of her mind, the record book sat heavy with what Aldrich had shown her, and the question that had been forming since her first night at Ironvale was solidifying into something she could no longer call uncertainty. The attack on the border had not been random. Someone had sent those wolves to Ironvale. And someone inside these walls, someone close enough to Emmerich to be trusted with his care, had made sure the boy could not speak about what he had seen. The danger was not past. It was waiting. The name came from an unexpected place. Josie had been at Ironvale for 9 days when she found the second record. Not in Aldrich's storage room, but in the library on the ground floor. A long room that smelled of old leather and pine resin, and the particular dry cold of a space that held more books than fires. She had gone there before dawn, unable to sleep, carrying a candle in a brass holder, and the restless feeling of a thought that was almost finished forming. She was looking for pack histories. Specifically, the records of senior wolves, their ranks, their assignments, their allegiances before Cassian's consolidation of the Northern Territories 12 years ago. She was not entirely sure what she was looking for. She only knew that Dovin, Emmerich's guardian on the day of the attack, conveniently dead, had to have come from somewhere, had to have been appointed by someone, and that appointment would be recorded. The pack histories were kept in 3 heavy volumes on the lowest shelf, their spines marked with the black wolf crest. She pulled all 3 and carried them to the reading table near the window and opened the first. An hour later, she found Dovin's entry. He had been appointed to the king's household staff 7 years ago. His sponsor, the senior wolf who had vouched for his character and loyalty, was listed in clean, careful script. The name was Fen. Josie sat with the candle burning low and thought about what that meant. She had heard Fen's name twice since arriving. Once from Ren, in passing. He was described as the king's oldest advisor, a wolf who had served the pack since before Cassian took his father's place, and once from one of the soldiers in the courtyard, who had spoken his name with the particular deference people reserved for someone whose authority was older than the current order. An advisor, a man of long-standing trust, a man who had placed Emmerich's guardian in his position. She closed the book carefully and sat in the cold library with the candle guttering in a thin draft, and the first gray suggestion of dawn appearing at the window. Her heartbeat was deliberate and steady, the way it went when she was frightened and refusing to let the fear make decisions for her. She needed to tell Cassian. Today. Before another day passed, and she was not sure why, only that the urgency had settled into her bones like cold. She did not get the chance immediately. The morning arrived with unexpected disruption, a commotion in the outer courtyard, voices raised, the sound of horses arriving hard and fast over frozen ground. Josie heard it from the corridor and followed the sound to a window overlooking the yard below, where 3 riders had dismounted from horses dark with sweat, despite the winter cold. They were speaking rapidly to Cassian, who had come down from the war room already dressed for cold weather, his fur mantle across his shoulders, his expression a controlled mask that she had learned to read well enough to see the alarm underneath. One of the riders handed him a rolled document sealed in red. Whatever was written in it, Cassian read it once, then looked up at the tree line beyond the gate, with the stillness of a man absorbing something he had been half expecting and fully dreading. Ren appeared at Josie's elbow as if conjured by the tension. "Border report," she said quietly. "The southern faction has moved. They've pushed 3 miles into the neutral territory. It's a provocation. They're daring him to respond." "Will he?" Josie asked. "He has to," Ren said. "Silence reads as weakness. Weakness invites worse." She folded her hands. "He'll ride out within the day." Josie watched Cassian below, He had rolled the document and handed it back to the rider, and now he was issuing instructions in the low, carrying voice she had heard him use in the war room. Clear, economical, no word wasted. Around him, the courtyard was beginning to move with purposeful urgency. Stable hands, soldiers checking weapons. "Ren," Josie said carefully. "Where is Fen this morning?" Ren glanced at her. "In his quarters, I imagine. He rarely comes to the courtyard for—" She stopped. Something in Josie's tone had reached her. She turned to look at her fully. "Why?" "I need to speak with the king before he rides out," Josie said. "Alone. And I need you to trust me without an explanation for the next 10 minutes. Ren studied her with sharp, assessing eyes. Then she gave a single nod. "I'll get you access, quickly." Cassian was in the war room for exactly 6 minutes before riding out, and Josie used 4 of them. She laid the pack history open on his map table, her finger on Dovin's entry, and set Aldrich's record beside it. She did not soften it. She told him everything. The grip bruising on the inside of Emmerich's forearm, the shape of the pattern, what Aldrich believed it suggested. She told him about Dovin's sponsorship and the name beside it. Cassian did not move while she spoke. He stood at the table with both hands flat on the maps, and the quality of his stillness was different from any she had seen from him before. It was not the controlled stillness of authority. It was the stillness of someone absorbing something that was rearranging everything they thought they understood. When she finished, the silence lasted long enough that she heard the wind against the shuttered window and the distant sound of horses in the yard below. "Fen," he said. Not a question, barely even a word. Just a name, said in a voice she had not heard from him before. "I may be wrong," Josie said. "The evidence is not certain, but I believe you should know before you ride toward the people he may be working with." Cassian looked at the pack history, at Dovin's name, at the careful script of Fen's sponsorship beneath it. He was utterly still for another moment, and then something moved across his face. Grief, she thought. That particular shade of grief that belongs to betrayal by someone trusted. And then it was gone, sealed behind the controlled mask, packed away for later. "You will not be alone here while I'm gone," he said. His voice was even. "I will leave 6 wolves I trust absolutely. Ren has authority over the household. You continue with Emmerich." He looked up at her. "Does he know I'm leaving?" "Not yet," Josie said. "I will tell him myself." He straightened, picked up the record she had brought and rolled it carefully. "I'm taking this with me." He met her eyes. "You could have waited to tell me this. It would have been easier." "Easier for who?" she asked. Something shifted in his expression. Not the almost smile from before, but something quieter and less guarded. "Thank you," he said. Plain and direct, the words carrying more weight for their plainness. He was gone before she could answer. She found Emmerich in the east corridor 20 minutes later. He already knew. She could see it in the set of his shoulders, tighter than usual, his left hand gripping the carved wolf, his eyes on the window at the end of the passage where the courtyard was visible below. From up here she could see Cassian in the yard, mounted now on a dark horse, his black fur mantle sharp against the white of the frozen ground. She sat beside Emmerich on the corridor bench, a low wooden thing, worn smooth, and looked out the window with him. Below, Cassian looked up. It was brief, just a moment of his pale blue gaze lifting toward the window where his son stood watching him. He held it for 2 heartbeats, then raised one hand, a simple, unhurried gesture, no drama in it, and turned his horse toward the gate. Beside Josie, Emmerich exhaled. It was the longest, most deliberate breath she had heard from him. A breath that came from somewhere deep, released slowly, carrying something with it on the way out. She did not speak. She sat with him while the horses passed through the gate, and the sound of hooves faded into the frozen forest, and she was aware that something important was happening in the space between them, some further loosening of the tight, frightened thing that had been holding him inward for 2 years. After a long time, he held the carved wolf out, turned it in his hands once, and set it on the bench between them. Then he looked at his left leg. Looked at it the way you look at something you have been afraid to examine too closely. His jaw was set. A small jaw. A child's jaw. But carrying an expression she recognized as determination. He put his hand on his knee, pressed down gently. Then he did something she had not seen him do. He shifted his weight forward, straightening the leg, pushing his foot flat against the floor, and he held it there. She knew it hurt. She saw it in the tight line around his mouth. She did not tell him to stop. She reached slowly into her satchel and brought out the small warming salve she had prepared 3 days ago, the compound of pine resin and ginger and beeswax that Aldrich had approved, designed to encourage circulation and ease the cold stiffness in damaged nerves. She held it out to him flat on her palm, not pushing it toward him, just making it available. He looked at it, looked at her. She nodded once. He took the tin, opened it with both hands. It smelled of warm pine and something sweet underneath, and looked at it for a moment. Then he looked at his leg again. What happened next was so small that someone watching from the doorway might not have noticed it at all. Emmerich dipped 2 fingers in the salve and pressed them, carefully and deliberately, to the skin above his brace. He worked it in with small circular movements, his brow furrowed with focus, his breathing steady. He was treating himself, taking the first active step in his own healing, on his own terms, in his own time. Josie kept her hands folded in her lap and looked out the window at the tree line where the riders had disappeared, and felt something fill her chest that she could not name precisely. It was not triumph. It was not the satisfaction of a remedy working. It was something closer to the feeling of watching a door, long stuck, finally decide to open. She did not hear Fen approach. She heard Wren's sharp intake of breath from further down the corridor, and that was enough. She turned. The man standing at the corridor entrance was older than she had imagined from his name in the records, broad-shouldered but gone to gray, with the weathered, authoritative face of someone who had spent decades being listened to. He wore a heavy wool cloak in dark green, and his eyes, when they moved from Wren to Josie to the boy on the bench, were doing a rapid, careful calculation. He looked at the open-pack history record in Josie's satchel, the edge of it visible above the leather flap, and she understood, with cold, complete clarity, that he had seen it, and that he knew she had shown it to Cassian, and that whatever careful plan had been unfolding in the shadow of Iron Vale for months had just been seen. "Healer," Fen said. His voice was warm and measured, built for reassurance. "I heard the king has ridden out. I wanted to check on the boy." Josie did not move from the bench. She did not stand. She held his gaze and kept her voice even and her hands very still. "He's fine," she said. "He's resting." Fen's eyes moved to Emmerich, who had gone absolutely still beside her, the carved wolf back in his grip. Then they moved back to Josie, and the warmth in them thinned just slightly at the edges, just enough to show what was underneath. He smiled. "Of course," he said. "Then I'll leave you to it." He left. Josie waited until his footsteps had rounded the far corner. Then she put her hand very gently on Emmerich's shoulder, not gripping, just resting, a steady presence, and said, as calmly as she could manage, "We're going to go sit with Wren now. Come with me." Emmerich stood. He took her hand. It was the first time he had reached for anyone in 2 years.